Thank you so much for joining us for today's program of healthy cooking from fermentation to kombucha tea. Today we have with us Cecilia Baum, who has worked with us through many programs. And many of those are usually healthy cooking programs. Just a little bit about Cecilia. Cecilia, during her early years, she was caught up in a corporate career, and she really never wanted, and it made her feel just blah about her body and her spirit, and she found herself wanting more. So she's tried to find that balance and vitality first through cooking and joined the CSA farm in Texas. From there, yoga and breathing and Ayurveda were natural additions. For nearly a decade, she's been working on these practices as a student and as a practitioner. As a new mom and resident of Charlottesville and a wife of a farmer, she works to maintain her own balance through health through daily habits and practices. So welcome, Cecilia Baum.
Yeah, so I would encourage sharing of tips. Fermentation is one of these beautiful arts that has been going on for a very, 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 very long time, probably as long as there have been human type animals storing food in any kind of way. And it's happened across cultures, which is really lovely, and it's something that's really special to share. I remember my first experience, probably it was sauerkraut or something like that with a fermented food, but my mom got like a starter from a friend to make, I think it was Amish friendship bread, if I remember correctly, back when I was a kid. And that was my sort of first peek into having a living culture that you could actually see, because of course we all have living cultures all over our body and in our body, and our existence depends on all these little creatures. The neat thing about fermented foods that we eat is that we're taking all of those things and putting them into an environment that is a little bit controlled, so we don't poison ourselves or our friends, and we have something tasty to eat. So the kind of roadmap for today is we'll make kombucha, so we'll kind of walk through the steps of that, and then talk about other kinds of fermentation. So we can talk about things like basic krauts, which I think are really fun to make, especially just a sauerkraut, which can be really nice. We can talk about, I'll share some resources that might be helpful if you're making things like fire cider, or you want to get into making different kinds of drinks. We'll talk a little bit about the health benefits, and then we can answer questions and go in whatever direction you'd like to go in. Again, keeping in mind that we have everybody from somebody who's never fermented, people who've never fermented before but love fermented things, to it sounds like some very experienced people in the crowd. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yeah, I want to show you what I have to deal with.
I saw your cat before, actually. I was like, wow, that's such a cute kitty. Very neat. The Zoom animals are my favorite. They're so much fun. I don't have any animals right now, but I do have a baby who's out on a walk with my husband, so she might make an appearance towards the end. And I know Tasha set aside 2 hours for this. That was just to make sure that we have enough time and spaciousness for what we're doing, but it'll probably be somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half, depending on questions and kind of where we go, what we do. So we'll get started. I tried kombucha for the first time, I don't know, maybe like a decade ago or like 15 years ago, and it was something a friend had made. So they had like one of those enormous jars and like this weird thing floating on top, and they're like, do you want to try this drink? And I was like, is it gonna hurt me? And I thought it was really fun. It was a really interesting flavored drink. It has a lot of health benefits, as people have kind of alluded to. And we'll talk through, I'm gonna start boiling some water here on the stove. And while that's going, we'll talk through sort of the basics, like the things you need to make your own kombucha. So the first thing you need is a way to boil water, and filtered water is usually best, especially if you live in the city and you might have chlorinated water. You are trying to grow something, and so you want to have things like clean hands and clean surfaces, but you don't want to make it antiseptic. You don't want to make it an environment that is not conducive to other living beings. So you want, like, for instance, like scrubbing your skin every day, it starts to get dry and dry out because everything kind of dies on it. Or in your digestive system, you want to feed things, all the little bugs in there, so they can be happy. So we want to create an environment that is that encourages the growth of good bacteria and yeast, but discourages the growth of bad bacteria that might make our tummies sick, or might make flavors that perhaps aren't great for us. So you need water, you need a vessel to boil it in and a way to boil it. Then you need some clean jars. So if you're starting, I would start off with something that's like a quart size or a liter. And it's nice to have different types of ones. So I have a ball jar over here that's going. These are neat because they actually seal. You can kind of pull them down. And you can have your primary fermentation and secondary fermentation both in kind of quart-sized jars, or you can have it in, so you can break it up into bottles. So the primary fermentation, which sounds a little scary, is what we're going to be looking at first today. So this is when we're boiling the water, and we're going to make sweet tea, which we're in the South. So even if you don't drink sweet tea, you probably have been exposed to sweet tea before. And the tricks for having successful kombucha brewing at first is to stick to really basic teas. So a black tea, green tea is also fine. White teas can start to get, depending on the type of white tea, might be a little bit tough, especially because of white teas a lot of times have other herbs in them. And you don't want to get things like English breakfast tea or Earl Grey. They have other oil, like bergamot in them. They have other oils, which can work, but they can also encourage the growth of that bacteria that we don't really want. So we're trying to stick to plain black tea. So that could be like a Lipton tea if you wanted. You can go to a place like Rebecca's or IY, and you can buy bulk black tea from Assam, or just like a Chinese generic black tea. I like to use organic in this process, again, because we're trying to encourage life and the growth of life. And a lot of, if it's not organic, it might have been sprayed with something that might not actually jive with the bacteria and yeast that we're trying to grow. So we'll mix in between talking and then also the practical steps. So our water over here is boiling. So I'm going to take the top off. I turn the heat off when I do this. And Andrea or Lorraine can also pop in and say how they make theirs if they'd like to share. And I have, so this is for, I'll share some recipes with you which have ratios. So this is for a quart, or about, which is about a liter container, which might sound like a small amount of kombucha, but you can quickly get into like 6 liters at a time, and it feels quite overwhelming, and you have a ton of kombucha. So if you're just starting, if it's something you like to drink, I would encourage you starting off with smaller vessels, and then you can add on from there. And most people probably have a quart-sized ball jar around. And so this is raw organic sugar, and I'm gonna put it into the water that has just finished boiling. Bowl was a little wet, so putting that in there and giving it a stir. I'm using a silicone spatula. You could use a wooden one if you wanted to. You want to just make sure things are clean.
So you're boiling the tea or you're boiling water?
So this was just water.
Okay.
Plain old water. And I brought it to a boil, and now I'm stirring the sugar to dissolve the sugar. And then I'm going to add tea. So I'm going to use tea bags because I figured that's what most people might have instead of loose leaf tea. So for 1 quart, you would use 2 tea bags, or about 1.5 teaspoons of loose leaf tea. So if you get loose tea, you can use any sort of like tea brewing vessel. I for kombucha like to use, that's my spice and tea drawer. So these little bags that you can put loose tea in. So if I were gonna make this with loose tea, I'd put 1.5 teaspoons in these little bags that you can also get. You can get them on the internet or at Rebecca's or IY or any sort of health food type store, and then close it to tie it. You can put loose tea directly in there, but then you just strain it. So it depends on how easily you might be able to strain and pour things. So right now we have the water that has boiled and we've turned it off. We stirred the sugar to dissolve, and then I added these 2 tea bags. And right now, this is the super exciting part. We're gonna cover it and just let it cool. So it needs to cool to room temperature. So are all the novice kombucha brewers, are they on, have we lost anybody yet?
I keep it simple by using a hot pot, electric hot pot to heat the water, and then I pour it into a large pyrex pitcher, which is about 8 quarts, and I put my tea in a tea ball, and I strain it through cheesecloth.
Yeah, that's another great way to do it.
Before I'd strain it before I add the sugar.
Okay. So I would just make sure that you have, if you still have warm or hot water to allow the sugar to dissolve, because it just makes it a little bit easier, especially if you're new. I very often will boil the water in my tea kettle and pour it directly in to one of these jars. If you are pouring boiling or near boiling water into a glass jar, please do make sure that it is a pyrex type glass that has been tempered, and so you don't have an exploding glass on your hands. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to make it in the pot today. It's I've heard horror stories about even pyrex or anchored glass that's exploded, so just be careful. The other way to do that is to keep something in there, like a wooden spoon or a metal spoon, to kind of absorb some of the heat that's in there. So that's one of the kind of caution points in terms of safety. Boiling water plus exploding glass is not something we probably want to get into. 2020 has been hard enough already. We don't want that on top of it. So this is the first step. So we're gonna let that hang out for a little bit, and I'll go back to what we were talking about before. So kombucha is, as far as I know in my reading, they don't know exactly where kombucha came from. It's probably came from China, probably traveled around on the Silk Road, and got distributed and then changed as everything does. So something starts somewhere and then it kind of has shifted around. Did anybody make sourdough bread during quarantine, or are they sourdough bread bakers?
I do. I'm currently bringing mine back. I have killed it a couple times and put it in the fridge, and that's what I'm also dabbling in. It's because it's a lot of work. It's like having another kid.
It is, yeah. A culture, so having a living culture is like having a pet. I spent some time living in Scandinavia, and everybody makes rye bread, and the rye bread is a sourdough type bread, so you're using a starter culture. And there are actually hotels where you can take your starter when you go on your 3-week vacation in the summer. So it can live somewhere and somebody will care for it while you're away. So you are inviting, perhaps not a cat like Connie's lovely cat, but you are inviting another being into your life, into your space, and you have to care for it. So the thing you are caring for with kombucha is called a scoby, typically, or the mother. Scoby stands for a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And I'm gonna show you a kind of like piece of one that can be, so they can start to get really thick. How thick did you say yours was getting, Andrea? Like 3 inches or something like that?
Yeah, hold on. I will take you and show you. Because somebody had asked about a sinking one. This is mine at about 3 weeks currently.
Okay.
So I have 2 that are sinking, and then I have one that just started to form on the top again because the other 2 sank. And that's about 3 weeks worth of growth.
Cool.
Yeah, mine was about 3 inches, but it's a really old scoby.
Yeah.
I've done this for so many years, but I've divided it many times, and it's just been about a year or so, maybe 2.
Yeah, so it starts to, I hope this doesn't sound scary to all the new people. So it's this kind of, gosh, the texture is like a jellyfish or something like that. I don't know. It's a little bit rubbery when it's out. It's, you probably won't be able to see it because my computer camera is not the best, but they're actually layers, and that's its growth. So it is a living thing, and it continues to grow when you put it into your new vessel. So the primary fermentation that I was talking about, or I guess the scoby, is it lives in, so I've taken a little bit out of this, but it's living, this one's sort of near the top, and it will form a new layer kind of each time you make a scoby, or each time you brew kombucha, or each time your mother starts to sink, the scoby starts to sink. It will just keep forming a new layer as long as you have a piece of the scoby in there, if that makes sense. So it starts, the scoby I feel like is maybe the most intimidating part of kombucha because it sounds a little weird, and it can look kind of strange. So I'm gonna take this one out. Every time you deal with yours, you just want to make sure that your hands are pretty clean. Again, it is not an overly delicate being, but it is something that you just don't want to introduce a lot of foreign material to.
I have a question for you. I've heard, because I took a kombucha class before, and the teacher said that you should not touch the scoby with any metal.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And the retort that I've heard from other people is it's fine if it's a stainless steel that's a high enough grade. So if so even people will brew in metal vessels, but it needs to be a pretty high grade stainless steel. So if you have a stainless steel ladle, it's probably fine, and it hasn't rusted with use, then it's probably okay. You can be quite careful if you'd like to. It's not going to kill it on contact. It's just reacting with the different minerals and things in the metal.
Oh, that's good, because I usually take off my rings and stuff like that if I'm like sticking my hand and grabbing it and moving it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine. So you start to get like pieces. I just want to show you the grossness too, so you're not surprised if you do it yourself. So these little pieces that grow and kind of go down into the different parts. And it looks, as with most with most things, you can tell when you look at it if it looks healthy or if it looks sick. So if it starts to get a lot of like pock marks in it, or it starts to change colors in weird ways, then it might not be doing so well. You might be able to take part of it off and reuse it. I feel like I've gone down the scoby rabbit hole, but maybe we can like bring it back just a minute and talk about like kombucha and what people like about it. So it is a sweet tea that we're fermenting. So the yeast is eating the sugar, and the bacteria is feeding on or reacting with the different minerals in the tea. And so together, they're working to change the flavor and the composition of the drink. So they're moving it from this sweet tea into this more acidic and potentially fizzy beverage that we enjoy. And the primary fermentation should always just be the sweet tea that we just made and the scoby, and nothing else. So no other flavors in that first one. And it's pretty hard to find regular kombucha, like unflavored kombucha, in the store to buy it. But that's what your first fermentation is. So what we just made, since it's too hot, I can't put the scoby in because it will kill it. If you think about baking bread, you can't add the yeast until, you don't want to add the yeast with hot water. You want to add it with like lukewarm water that feels comfortable to the touch, because it is, again, a living thing that we're trying not to kill. You do need a scoby to start. So unlike sourdough bread, you can actually take flour and water and sometimes some type of fruit juice or something, and you can work with it on your counter, and yeast from the environment will actually colonize, and you can have a sourdough starter. When you make sauerkraut, there's a yeast that lives on the cabbage leaves, and you're just providing an environment where that yeast can start to eat the different sugars, the glucose that's available, the fructose, things like that, and change the flavor. So move from something that's sweeter into something that's more acidic. A scoby, you need either some kombucha, some plain kombucha, or you need a friend like Andrea or Lorraine or to give you a piece of their mother. Or Farmstead Ferments sells kombucha starter cultures. So this is from a while ago. They sell them through Rebecca's, and I'm pretty sure that Fifth Season has them as well. So you could go buy one there. And it's just a little piece of their mother in regular kombucha tea. So from a primary fermentation to start. So to review, what you would need if you have never brewed kombucha before and you don't know anyone who has a mother, you need a way to boil your water. So whether that's an electric kettle, a pot on the stove, whatever it is. You need sugar, so just plain sugar. You need a kind of tea that is a plain tea, so a black tea or a green tea that doesn't have any flavors in it. So it's not lemon green tea, or it's not Lady Grey tea. It's just plain old Assam, Darjeeling, any kind of Lipton black tea. You need a preferably glass to be safe vessel to ferment it in, and you need a scoby. And then you also need a piece of tightly woven cloth, like a clean dish towel works fine. You could also use any sort of muslin or something like that to actually cover it with a rubber band. So you don't need a ton to start. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure it's not too complicated for people who've never done it before. So if you have questions, you can either chat them or you can speak them. But I want to make sure that I haven't lost you already and you're like, I can never brew kombucha.
So you do that by boiling the sugar And you have to put a piece of SCOBY in it, or you're making your own?
No, so you wait until it cools
Yeah.
to put the SCOBY in. So the SCOBY, so you have brewed this sugary water, this sugary tea, and you let it sit until it cools to room temperature.
Right.
And then you move it into a clean vessel, so a clean glass vessel and then you put the SCOBY in. Or alternatively, so that's one way. Alternatively, you can put the hot sugary water in this vessel now and wait until it cools to room temperature and then add the SCOBY.
Okay. So you have to SCOBY. Totally, you just have to get some SCOBY somewhere.
You have to get some SCOBY somewhere. So you can't, it's not, it is a wild fermentation in many ways because my SCOBY probably has a slightly different makeup than Lorraine's SCOBY because my environment's a little bit different. So the exact ratio of different kinds of yeast and different kinds of bacteria are all going to be a bit different. So if you want to think about sourdough, a lot of people will go to San Francisco and buy a sourdough starter because they think the bread in San Francisco is so wonderful. But after about 2 to 3 weeks, almost all of the yeast in the sourdough has changed to yeasts that are present in your own environment because that's what happens. So it's a living, changing thing, maybe not being, depending on your definition of being, but it is not stagnant. So if I gave you a SCOBY, Connie, it would be different in your house after a few weeks or a few brews, but pretty similar. So it would still have the same general makeup. Like we're both humans, but we're both our own people too, right? We have like little differences in our DNA that make us us. And so you do need to get a SCOBY from somebody.
Yeah, I can buy it at Rebecca's or Fifth Season.
Yep, so you can buy it at Rebecca's, which is cool because it's from Farmstead Ferments, which is a local place. You can get it, I'm pretty sure, Fifth Seasons. They kind of, sometimes they have a lot, sometimes they don't, but they would sell them there. You can also ask any of your friends if they brew kombucha, because I'm sure it is not a limited resource if you're a kombucha brewer, so it's not like you're hoarding your SCOBY and you can never give it away. You're kind of always looking for places or things to do with it. And so if you happen to know somebody like Andrea or Lorraine who's brewing it, they'd probably be more than happy to give you a piece of theirs to start your own. And you don't need a lot. You just need a kind of little piece. And as long as it's healthy, it will grow that new layer like Andrea showed us on the top of her vessel. So once it's in there, it will start to have a new layer that will form on top. Okay, so we'll fast forward. So I made this one earlier this morning just so because I know that the boiling water wouldn't cool in 30 minutes. So this is another one. We've brewed it, we put our SCOBY in, we cover it with a towel, a clean kitchen towel and a rubber band. And then you want to set it someplace that's out of direct sunlight and is somewhere not super cold. Any kind of room temperature should be fine, not really hot. And let it hang out for at least a week before you touch it or taste it or do anything. So for a week, you let the yeast convert the sugars, you let the bacteria feed on all the little tannins in the tea, and the mother grows, it forms this new layer. And then sometime after about 7 days, depending on how big your vessel is and how big the surface area is on top, your kombucha will start to taste ready. So it's going to be somewhere between 7 and probably 20 days. I know, Andrea, you have quite a big, it looked like you have a continuous brew system, perhaps? And
yeah,
so,
I have a continuous brew. Mine I've had continuously by gallon for probably 10 years.
Oh wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So do you have an idea how long it takes when you add new tea in? How many days it takes with your gallon system for it to kind of reach maturity?
So it depends on how you like it, in my opinion. My husband likes it at about 8 to 10 days. I like mine to go a little further, so it's almost like it tastes like a vinegar almost. Mm-hmm. So I like mine more towards like 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So I try to do a new like tea system every 3 to 4 weeks. I'll drain it down and then bottle it up, and then I'll do a new tea system with the 2 cups.
Cool. Yeah, so it is a personal preference. So I think that was a great example that your husband loves it pretty early and that you like it a little bit more acidic. So Toya, I know you said your daughter's there, so if you both like kombucha, you might find that one of you likes it pretty quickly and the other one likes it to be fermented a little bit longer. So if you're in a household of multiple kombucha drinkers, you might have your own, or you might have to start to compromise on which day you actually want to take it out. But it's not a time intensive thing. Really, I mean, making the tea I think is pretty easy. Transferring it into the vessel and putting the scoby in its new home is fine. And then it's a pretty hands-off process for the next 7 to 21 days. You do want to start tasting it at some point after 7 days, because if you have a particularly warm house, or the width of your jar, if it's quite a wide opening. So for instance, this kind that I was showing you, it's a pretty wide opening for a quart jar. And so this one actually ferments pretty quickly. You want to stick, I stick a straw, I have like a silicone straw that I stick underneath and just like I stick it in there, cover my thumb, and then taste it. I don't know if anyone has other ways that they like to taste theirs, but that's a way to get under the mother to actually taste the tea to see what it's like. If you have a continuous brew one, it's easy. That means you tap it a little bit. Yeah, so a continuous brew. So we'll talk about that in a minute, because I think anyone who starts to brew will move to continuous brew. We are actually going to be moving soon, so I've disassembled my continuous brewing system and have downsized to these little jars for the next little bit. But I think if you're drinking it in any quantity really, or you just get into brewing it, it's a really nice way, is the continuous brew. So you taste your buddy, your tea, and you find out when you like it. And that will be, again, you want to kind of taste it. So you might taste it on day 7 and say, wow, that's still really sweet, and not come back for another 5 days or so. If it's getting close, then maybe taste it the next day and see how it is. Obviously, this is going to change unless you're in a completely climate-controlled house. It will change with the seasons. So if you're a bread baker, you also know that the amount of time that it takes for a loaf to rise in the fall is different from in the spring. The amount of water you need to make the same loaf of bread varies when it's very dry in the fall versus when it's very wet in the spring. So after you've tasted it, what you would do is you take the mother, if it's ready. So you've decided you want to go for it. So you're ready for the secondary fermentation. You take the mother out and put it with some of the extra fluid. So about a half a cup of the kombucha that you've just brewed with for a quart size. And then you can move it into another jar, and this is when the secondary fermentation happens. So you can leave it in a jar, or if you have bottles, those are really nice. So any kind of bottle with a pop top works very well. Ours are packed away right now, so we're just, again, because we've downsized, we can actually just make the secondary ferment in another jar. And you can either leave it and just drink the kombucha as it is, which is kind of neat. You can taste the tea very well. Or this is when you might add flavorings. So ginger is a very common kombucha flavor. You can make a ginger simple syrup, which we can talk through if you'd like. You could add fruit. And I can give you some of the ratios of what works generally. You can also add different herbs depending on the type of season. So now it might be fun to make like an apple cinnamon simple syrup type thing and add that, and then you could have a very seasonally inspired kombucha for Christmas, for instance, or for the end of December, whatever holiday you celebrate then, or even just the new year. You could make something with different spices to have like a sort of pumpkin-ish spice inspired kombucha as well. So if you have a plain black tea, that's probably the easiest canvas on which to add other flavors. Like I know elderflower is one. I don't know if people have other favorite kombucha flavors that they drink. It sounded like we had some avid kombucha drinkers out there. So I don't know, or if Andrea or Lorraine, which you actually, yeah, the bottles at Fifth Seasons, they are great. Any beer brewing place usually has them, which is neat, because anybody who's brewing anything will, anybody who's bottling something, fermenting at home, needs something with those flip top bottles or a bottler.
Currently, I'm doing something called cranberry wassail, and it's a fresh cranberries with cinnamon sticks and like orange peels for fall, and then you take that and add it in with the kombucha, and it gives it like that sparkling cranberry. It's really neat.
Neat. Do you cook the cranberries at all first, or do you just add them in?
I usually cook the cranberries and all the ingredients together in a pot, and then take the juice when it cools and put it in half and half kombucha, half cranberry.
Yeah, I mean that's usually a good ratio. So something between 30 and 50% of the fruit juice, and then 70 to 50% of kombucha if you're using fruit juices. If you're adding a simple syrup, like a ginger simple syrup, which I think is one of the nicest, easiest ones, you can add as little as 1 or 2 tablespoons for a quart, or you can add a little bit more. If you'd like the kombucha to be sparkling, adding a little bit of something with sugar or honey to allow that fermentation to continue, that bubbliness, is key. With the secondary fermentation, while the first one we had it open to the air, so we had our piece of fabric with a rubber band around it. With the second fermentation, you're going to close the bottle or whatever vessel you have it in. And that allows the carbonation that's happening to stay enclosed. And the secondary fermentation is usually only like between 2 to 4 days, again, dependent on temperature. But after about 2 days, you might want to taste it. You might want to actually let some of the, like uncork it and let some of the air off if it's a very active fermentation. And then you would put it in the refrigerator and enjoy. So we make the tea, you put the scoby in, you cover it, and you let it sit for somewhere between 7 and 21 days. And then you move it into another vessel. You can leave it. If you don't want it to ferment a second time, you can just put it in the refrigerator then if you don't want it to be bubbly. But the second fermentation is only a few days and it's closed, and then you put it into the refrigerator, which kind of, it doesn't stop the fermentation, but it really slows it. So if you remember back to chemistry class, like temperature is one of those keys for any sort of reaction, and so we're lowering the temperature, which slows the reaction down. This is really just science class for adults that you get something fun at the end. So that's the most basic kombucha. And because we have people who are super new to it, I just want to make sure that that made sense and that you feel like if you want it. So I'll send Tasha, I'll give her a document that she can send out to you. We can actually, I'll bring up the steps so you can look through. Because I think I can share a screen too. So this is what we were talking about. So the primary fermentation. So you're having a jar, some tea, the sugar, your scoby that you've either purchased or gotten from a friend, water. The vinegar is really, if you use a very smelly soap when you wash your dishes, you don't really want that residue in the jar. So you can use about a tablespoon of distilled vinegar to just get away any of the soapy residue, to kind of get it back to a neutral position. And then this starter liquid, and if you buy a scoby, or if you phone a friend and get a scoby from a friend, they'll usually give it usually comes in some sort of jar that will have liquid and the scoby in there. So that's something that you would have from the beginning, and it's something that you save from as you brew from time to time. And the instructions are pretty simple, so I've tried to outline them just in a really basic way. And I won't read through all of these because we just talked through them, but just so you know, this is what you'll get. So if you were busy scribbling down notes, just know that this is where it might, you don't really need to. So the rule of thumb that I've heard and has worked for me is I don't usually taste my tea, my kombucha, until it looks like the newly formed scoby is somewhere around 1/4 of an inch. So there actually is one that has formed. So if I look after 7 days and there's just a really thin film, I know that it's probably not ready, at least according to my taste. And you'll start, the more you brew, the more you'll learn. This is one of those arts, perhaps more than just direct science. And these are ratios that generally work. So as I said, this is a quart size, so we had 3.5 cups of water, 1.5 teaspoons of loose tea, and just a little bit of sugar. If you are living, if you have multiple drinkers in your family, kombucha drinkers, like a gallon actually is not a ton. And usually you would have maybe more than one going at a time, depending on your rate of consumption. So from a consumption standpoint, I mean, the probiotics, so it's tasty, right? I mean, that's why I like it. So I'll say my favorites. I like oolong tea. I think oolong tea plain kombucha is hands down my favorite. I think it is such a lovely, delicate flavor. And it's by far my preferred favorite kombucha drink. If I'm using black tea or green tea, I really love ginger, which is why I've mentioned it several times. I think it's a really nice combination. I feel like my body feels really nice when I consume it. It's neat to play with different things though. So I made a lavender one this spring, which I really enjoyed. I'm gonna make one of these into an apple cinnamon one. I really love that idea of the orange cranberry. That's cinnamon. That sounds very fun. On the internet, there are millions of different recipes, but really you can start to figure out what you like and what feels nice. Mint is another really nice one in the summertime. It's very cooling. From a property standpoint, kombucha can be a little bit heating in your body. And so it's nice to maybe balance that with something that's cooling. I tried like a mint cilantro this summer, which was kind of fun. So that was the secondary fermentation.
You, Connie?
Good. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't talk to you.
Okay.
So those are the kombucha basics. And it really, as long as you can get your hands on a starter, it's super simple. Most people probably have some tea in their house. Just make sure it's plain. You probably have sugar in your house, and you probably have some jars that work. I mean, you could use, as long as you tasted the water out of it, you could use like an old pasta jar if you wanted to. You could use like many different things. So it's not something where you need to go out and spend $100 on new equipment to make kombucha. Like you can go, I think they're like $10 to $15 for a new scoby if you're buying one, if you don't have a friend who has one. But everything else you probably have in your house. Like I said, you can use a clean kitchen towel. You can use the jars you already have, so you don't need to go off and buy things. It really frustrates me when things like fermenting are made into expensive hobbies on the internet. Like you need this $20 thing and this $20 thing and this $20 thing in order to make what you want. As with everything, I think it's really neat to be able to try it at a low cost. And if it's something you love doing, you get really into, then you can always start to add some things on that might make it easier. So for instance, both Lorraine and Andrea, as experienced kombucha brewers, have mentioned that they have continuous brew systems. So that means that you're brewing somewhere between 1 and maybe 4 to 5 gallons in one vessel, and you're drawing off with a spigot, and then you're adding new tea on. So it's not something that you're totally emptying one jar and starting again in a new one. So you're leaving the scoby in there, the mother in there. They can happily grow, and you're just adding more tea. And then you start to get into things where when you're adding tea, the scoby usually sinks. I found when I had the system going, we took it down about a month ago, was that every time I added new tea, my scoby would sink. And sometimes it would come back up depending on the time of year, but I'd always get a new layer on top. And if it looked like I was just getting a new layer on top and that one had actually formed, I would take the old one out, because it felt like we were kind of getting overkill in there, like there was maybe too much scoby, and that worked fine for me. I don't think that there's a total hard and fast rule. You don't want, if you have a jar and your scoby is taking, if you have one on top that's maybe like a ½ inch, and then you have another one down here that's 2 or 3 inches, you have like your ratio of scoby to tea is probably off. So taking out the bottom one is fine. And it's okay to remove them. People do all sorts of wonderful things with their scobies. I just usually add it to our compost because it seems like a nice thing to do. Sometimes I've like added it to houseplants, like divided it up to give them something, but it's I don't know, I've heard of people like making different products out of the actual leathery scoby that you get, but just kind of tossing it is fine. Any sort of, wherever you put your food scraps, it would do well. Does that make sense to everybody who's new? Connie, you still good? You can just give a thumbs up if you want to, or if you have any questions. Awesome. How about Toya? I know that we're recording, so if you don't want to speak, I totally understand, but I just want to make sure that for the people who are new to kombucha brewing, that they kind of have questions answered, so they feel like they might actually be able to go off and brew if they wanted to.
I was just wondering, I think I understand it. I've got a book that I have as well, but so when you take it out, how did you say you just leave a little bit of the tea and that's how you store it in a sealed jar?
Yeah, so most people will find that they will move right from one into the next. So if you find that it's time to bottle this brew, on that same day, they would make a new one. And so they would move the mother from that into the new one. If you don't want to do that, you could put it back in whatever jar it came in with some of the tea, so it can still live in there.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure. And when you okay, all right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah, so it needs to be in a tea-like liquid to continue living. So if it needs some of the sugar, it needs some of those tannins from the tea to continue being happy. Otherwise, it will die. It will become a kind of leathery jellyfish on the beach instead of a happy jellyfish in the sea. Okay. If you happen to have made a primary brew, and you cover it up, and then you go on vacation or life gets busy or whatever, and you forget that it's sitting in your closet or whatever for however long, it's probably fine. You probably don't want to drink the liquid, but you might use the liquid like you would use apple cider vinegar. So you can use it in cooking things. You can use it in any way really that you would use vinegar. You can make salad dressings with it, things like that. But don't waste it because it has all sorts of goodness. So many of the vinegar type products we have been, all their live parts have been killed off. And this is where the health benefits of kombucha come in. So it is, because it has all these different living cultures, this scoby, it's what is helping to feed your microbiome in your gut. So because they're living bacteria and living yeast, we have, I forget how many different thousands of creatures that live in us and need to be fed different things. So the advice generally is eat as many different plant products as you can. So aim for 30 different spices and vegetables and fruits and rices and grains in 1 week. And then also having something that is a probiotic. So apple cider vinegar that's alive, that hasn't been, I'm losing the word when they like kill everything, but sorry, my mind just went blank. Or something like, yeah, pasteurized, that's the word. So that hasn't been pasteurized, or kombucha or something like that, something that's live fermented. Sauerkraut also falls into that category, or any of the other lovely different things that you can make. And it's, you can overdo the kombucha, so you can start to feel like maybe it's not so nice in your tummy. But certainly having something around like a cup a day or something like that is quite healthy. And you'll find, in terms of bang for your buck, if somebody told you should be taking a probiotic, having something like a kombucha with the live cultures in it is going to be much more potent in your body than even something like yogurt, which usually only has 1 strain of bacteria in it, or a pill probiotic, which usually has 4 kinds of things in it. So this, your own SCOBY will have different mixes, but it will certainly provide your gut with a good dose of probiotics. So perhaps if you were on antibiotics recently, this would help to kind of recolonize and repopulate your gut as well through that. It's also a nice way to be connected to your natural environment. So it's I think all ferments are that way, whether it's sourdough or whether it's kombucha or whether it's sauerkraut or something like that. You're kind of, because the culture is a product of wherever you live, the environment you're living in, it's a way to kind of keep everything in balance, which is pretty neat, I think. Okay, so we're around the hour mark and we've made our kombucha, but I want to then talk about perhaps what other people want to talk about. So we can talk about like basic vegetable fermenting if you want to. I'm gonna stop sharing since this has been up for a while, but I did a quick search on the libraries. So what the library has available. So I love this book, this Wild Fermentation. I think it's really, really wonderful. The Art of Fermentation is a textbook, it feels like. So they're both by Katz. This one's perhaps a little lighter. They're really wonderful. I think this one got the James Beard Award. And then if you want to get into really kind of heavy duty, if you want next level fermenting, I would go to the Noma one, which is really neat, about how to make your own. I mean, you can make your own miso, they like black garlic, all sorts of things like that. And some of them require creating like fermentation chambers and they ferment for 8 months. But depending on how far you go down the fermentation black hole, this is a neat one as well. But I think that these two are really wonderful. And I feel like I've heard of this one, the one all the way at the top too, which is neat. So I'll stop sharing now. But anyway, just to kind of highlight the resources that are available to you. And again, resources that are free, making this a I don't know, something that you can do with just really minimal investment, which I think is neat. You don't have to go off and buy a ton of stuff. Although you can buy your starter through Amazon, I think. I looked to see if they had scobies. You can have your SCOBY delivered to your door if you'd like to, through the mail.
I've heard there's a website called Cultures for Health, and they sell sourdough starters, but they also have a kombucha one too. And I've had friends who've done that and had really good turnout from that one.
Awesome. Yeah, I think as long as you can get one that looks like it's healthy, which you'll be able to tell. I mean, our fermentation's neat because it allows you to tune into your intuition. So there are rules that I can give you, right? I can give you rules of thumb about when you should check your culture, when you should taste it and see if it's to your liking. But it's really up to you, and it's up to you to kind of like know if something looks like it's right or looks like it's not. With the SCOBY and kombucha, usually if they're like black spots on it, it's not a great thing. It can start to get dried out, but if it's changing different colors, I don't know, I know the camera isn't great, but like it should be this kind of healthy whitish looking. I don't know if that looks healthy to you, but it looks like a healthy SCOBY to me. It has a little bit of give. It smells sour, but not unpleasant. And that's usually the rule of thumb for sourdough starters too, right? It might smell sour, it should smell a little bit sour, but it doesn't smell unpleasant. And our noses are generally very good at telling us when something is beginning to turn. We just have to start to pay attention to them. But generally with food, our noses can tell you almost immediately if something's bad. All right. Where should we go? What do you want to, and if people feel like this is enough and they've had overload from what we've talked about so far with the kombucha, that's fine. I totally understand. We can say go forward. All right, so Lorraine said big book of kombucha. That's not, yeah, Sandor Katz is I don't know, fermentation expert in many ways. That sounds neat. I'll have to look that one up too.
Cecilia, I just wanted to add, when Cecilia was sharing her screen, some of those things that came up that said like Freeding on it. Freeding is a downloadable app that you can download yourself, or you can access it through your desktop. And the great thing about Freeding, that it's always available. So if you wanted to download any of those, and let's say it expires, you can just download it again. So there's no wait time on those. You can just download them right away. And we have several books on fermentation in there, as you saw when we were going through it. So if you can't get in with physical books, you can also download them as well.
Thanks for mentioning that, Tasha. I mean, I think I'll just give a little shout out to the library too, with all the resources that are available online. It's really amazing. It is certainly a place to look first for many of the things. And you might find that once you get into it, you want to buy the book because you want to have the reference. I mean, the fermentation and wild fermentation go through everything from how to make your own dill pickles and kombucha to wild things you've probably never heard about, like specific drinks to different countries and things like that. And so you might want them later on, but it's really neat that you can get them for free as a trial too, to see if it's something you want to get into, because you might find that like you love it, or you might find that like you'd actually rather just buy it and it's not for you. I think it's really fun. I think it's a really fun project to do together also. So my husband and I both like doing it. I got my mom into it for a while. She really enjoyed it. it's a really neat way to make friends. So if you move to different places, you'll find there's usually like a fermenting community and people who get really into it. If you want to make a vegetable ferment, I would say sauerkraut is probably the easiest and most basic. Kimchi is really fun, but you have to add some other things to it. But sauerkraut, if you want to make a quart, it's like a pound of cabbage and a tablespoon of salt, and you sprinkle the salt on top of the cabbage, and then you just massage the cabbage as much as possible to break down the cell walls. It will get really watery, and then you push everything into one of these jars. You can have it loosely. So if I was doing it in this jar, I would take the sealing ring off and just have the top kind of sitting on there. I might actually take this off, is what I would do. So, keep it sitting on top. You can get fermentation weights, but usually it stays down pretty well. And each day, just making sure the cabbage is below the water level. And after a week, you can test it. And after 2 to 3 weeks, it's probably going to be ready. And you've made your own sauerkraut with pretty minimal effort and not a lot of financial investment either. I would buy an organic cabbage because you want the yeast that are actually living on the leaf to be there, and you don't want to be introducing a lot of the other chemicals that are in non-organic cabbage into that fermentation space. So again, the best way to ensure you're setting yourself up for success, especially when you're hoping to capitalize on the life force within different things. So you might not always use organic sugar or tea or cabbage, but if you're fermenting, it's a recommendation that I would make. I was going to say something else with that too. Then you can start to add spices. Farmstead ferment. You can go into many different stores and look at the flavors, and perhaps you have a favorite one. Like, I like the tangy turmeric from Farmstead Ferments, and so that's a neat one to try and recreate for me, like putting turmeric in there and adding the different vegetables and to see what happens. It's in our walk-in, I should have brought it over, but we're making like a butternut cabbage kraut right now. So mostly cabbage, but has some butternut squash in there, which provides a little bit more sugars for the yeast, and put some different spices in that. So with even the basic sauerkraut, you could add in, caraway is a very common one, but you could add other spices in there, like if you like a rosemary kraut or something like that to create it. I might turn this on and see if I don't know if you can see me any better. It's a dark day. Okay, so we have the two experienced, a couple people sent me messages that said they had to leave because it was around 3 o'clock. So, Toya is the only person who is left who's kind of new to the whole kombucha thing, or new fermenting. Toya, do you have specific questions you want to talk about?
No, not really. I've gotten all the ingredients. I just have to do it. So I wanted to wait until we did the class to try. So, no specific questions, I guess.
Awesome. Do you feel like you have the tool? So once Tasha sends you this recipe, do you feel like you have the tools to make kombucha?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. I just want to make sure that you can go off and do it, because I think that's the neat things about these programs, that you can like go forth and do it yourself and it will become yours rather than, I don't know, just casually learning something. But if you don't want to make it, that's fine. There's no pressure, right? But to that you actually feel like you've gotten something out of the workshop.
Oh yes, definitely. Got all the ingredients, so I'm ready to try it. So this has given me more confidence to do it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. And then Andrea and Lorraine, do you want to chat? Do you have any other questions or things you want to chat about in the next few minutes before we move on?
I did have a question for you. So currently I bought a fermentation kit online, and it comes with these lids, and I think they're fermentation lids. So, but I haven't read a whole lot about it, but maybe off the top of your head, they look like this, and they have like dials on them.
Yeah, so they have gas release and dials. So usually the dial you can like say when you make it, so you know you don't forget. And the gas release, it will release the gas, but you can also push it to the side and it will release more. So when you're making sauerkraut or something like that, if you have the weight on it and you can put that on top, it just allows for the exchange, for the burping to kind of happen automatically. So you don't have to do it yourself.
So would those be good for, like, I'm making a ginger bug. Would that be something I'd use for a ginger bug? Because that's one thing is I've been reading a little bit about that they're okay for some ferments, but not okay for others. And I don't know why.
So I think a kombucha one, for instance, needs more air exchange, and a ginger bug I think would be fine with one of those tops. But like a kombucha one, if you put one of those tops on, it wouldn't actually ferment enough. Like it needs more air going around it for it to change. Like a sauerkraut, you want it to be more covered than this, so you would want a top like that, or like I said, just putting the top on, loosely on, allows for some air exchange, but not a ton, because you're just trying to control the environment a little bit.
Okay. Because
I use those lids a lot. I think they're really great. I think they make it super easy.
Okay, yeah, because I put one on my fire cider, and that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I made fire cider quite a few years ago, but I didn't use it then, and I can't remember, like, if it's something that I should be using for the fire cider, or if the fire cider is more like the kombucha where it shouldn't, and I should have more airflow.
I think you need more airflow with the fire cider.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're wanting it to go a little bit further. So you want it to be actually more exposed to have that happening, that exchange.
That's what I thought too. Okay.
I would think the airlocks like you use with wine and some of the other ferments would work better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are neat. So those prevent any, then that's only stuff going out, which actually those lids you have, it's very hard. I mean, air's not really getting in, it's just going out through there too.
Okay.
The airlocks that Lorraine is talking about, they're like when it's actually physically bubbling. So if you're making beer and that fermentation, like it's burping, you can see it kind of going up and down.
Okay.
Have you seen the airlock jars? They have some at Fifth Season where the airlock fits into the hole in the top of the jar. These glass,
that's super neat.
The glass jars she's using that flip down and click shut. It's that kind of jar, but it has a hole in the top of the glass lid. And then the airlock fits into that. It's got a cork and
so it like has a little rubbery cork, right, where it like sits down in there, so it forms a seal, which is what you need for a lot of these different things. Like so when you get into brewing something like beer, you really don't want anything coming in after you've cooled it down. So after you have the wort, and then you boil it for however long, and at that point you want it to be totally closed off from the outside environment, to not introduce any unsavory things in there that will create different flavors and things like that.
They work really good too with the pickles that the old-fashioned pickles on your countertop. If you do something like that, but other things as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
My only question is it possible to get too much yeast in the bottom of a kombucha? Because I was just stunned at how much yeast I had when I changed this recently, and how how much of that yeast to put back into the continuous brew.
Yeah, I think you can. So I think that's one of the things with continuous brews that I found every so often I needed to change the vessels, so to like actually break the continuous cycle. And I think that so we don't have air conditioning, so our house gets really hot in the summertime. Like it's decently shaded, but I found that we were creating a lot of yeast in ours. When I lived in Denmark, where the climate is much more mild, I didn't have as many problems. So I don't know if it's the yeasts around Virginia, around this area, or if it was a temperature thing for me, but I have found that, Lorraine. And so what I did was I had a second vessel that I would then like transfer everything to, and actually keep, like take a minimal part of the scoby and a little bit of the yeast and move it over, but not a lot, and kind of let it not start fresh, but just kind of give it a new, like if it was, give it a good scrub if it was something that you were washing type thing.
Yeah, that's what I recently did, but I wondered because and my house is typically a little warmer too, and it was going so fast to vinegar each cycle, like within 3 days, and so that's why I broke it down. But I wasn't sure, since the scoby dropped, and normally my scobies don't drop when I start a new batch. I was afraid that maybe I had it misbalanced.
No, I think that's fine. I think it should bounce back. I don't know how long it's been, but it should be okay. It just, it doesn't have its same like buoyancy and strength, but it doesn't mean that it's not, as long as it still looked healthy, and it sounded like yours was okay.
Yeah, I do use the top portion. Yeah. Okay, I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I had an issue. Thank you.
No, I think that sounds like, I mean, I've been doing this, but I'm not an expert, right? Like I haven't written a kombucha book or anything like that. But my personal experience and experience with friends is with when there's that overproduction of yeast, it does turn to vinegar really quickly, and it's just kind of starting over. And having a sinking scoby is really no problem as long as it looked like it was healthy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I have these tips that we'll send out, and Tasha, you can send them to anybody who signed up for it as well, so they feel like they have some places to start. And yeah, I think unless there are further questions, maybe I'll send you off to make your own kombucha.
Thank you so much for attending this program for the Do-It-Yourself Kombucha. Special thanks, of course, to Cecilia Baum. Her address is here on the screen. Thank you so much.